Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're ready to go now. So yeah, welcome everyone. As I said, my name's Steve Sully. For those of you who don't know, and I'm the director for our London operation. I'd like to start by saying thank you for your time today on the webinar, your business, and most importantly, your partnerships. I've said this a few times already, but these are certainly unprecedented times. We can and we must learn together and share with each other how we're learning to navigate the current climate. Today's webinar is on remote management. This is about managing business as unusual in the new norm, which seems to be the buzz phrase of today. We're all working from home for the foreseeable, and it's very, very likely that even when we are allowed to return to the offices, it's going to be on a phased approach. So there are going to be many of our staff that are still working remotely for some time. So everything that we learn about today and the key takeaways are probably going to be long-term fixes and things that we learn in the long term rather than just the short term. So what we're going to discuss today will be covering communication styles, systems you might want to put in place to maximize and to manage your processes more smoothly, balancing work-life or life-work, and then lastly, building teams and employee plans. Our very special guest presenter on today's webinar, presenting our content, is Katy Tanner. Katy Tanner is the director within our leadership and development team. Katy covers the entire international zone, which is every country outside of the US where we have a Robert Half operation. Katy, who we're very lucky to also have based in the UK, her role is to support all of our managing directors and operational directors within their own sort of personal and professional leadership. Katy's been with the business for almost 20 years. I've been lucky enough to work with Katy for the last 12. And her first 17, in fact, started in the Bristol office at a desk, then moving on to running many other geographies, many other lines of business in a director capacity. Always having a love for people can be tracked back to her pre-professional days and her pre-Robert Half days. Katy holds a BSc in psychology, and prior to Robert Half was actually training to be a clinical psychologist, which I didn't know myself until she sent this over. Nothing gives her more passion, excitement, and joy than being a mummy to her 3 children. So without further ado, over to you, Katy.
Thanks, Steve. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today. We know how precious time is at the moment, and we hope that we'll give you some really good takeaways that you can reflect upon and share with your teams. So as Steve said, my name's Katy Tanner, and today I'm going to be talking about how to navigate leading remotely in these current uncertain times. Previously, many of you may have joined us in kind of more of a business breakfast format, a face-to-face format, where we would have spoken about a subject such as this. But just like you as a business, we are learning how to deliver things to our clients in a new virtual way. But what we hope is you will still get that same sense of standards of high commitment, high customer service, and speed of response. Before I start, I guess I'd just like to say that this is by no means perfect. It's more us sharing our recommendations and experiences really on how to lead remotely. I would imagine some of you have read lots about this already, or you may have already been on a similar webinar, and there will be similarities. You're going to hear some similar things, but I guess what is important is to keep reminding yourself of this. This is not just about transitioning our people. We've probably been in this position now for 4, maybe coming on 5 weeks. And it wasn't just about getting your teams up and running. It's now about supporting them through that entire journey that we have in front of us. So it's good if this isn't the first time you've heard this, because I think the consistency of revisiting it can only serve you well. I would say this workshop was written very much with the people you lead, the people that we lead at the very heart of it. And we feel that everyone right now needs to feel safe, that they belong and that they matter. And everyone at the moment is probably having an emotional reaction, whether that's yourself or someone on your teams. I know that I have, and the people that I'm working with have had good days and bad days and everything in between. And I guess those feelings can be anything from frustration, anxiety, fear. And I guess our job as leaders is to try and give them as much consistency, predictability, and familiarity as possible, because that will reinforce the safety, mattering, and belonging. Before we move on, I just want to really talk about safety. And we've seen probably in the last couple of weeks, it falls into three distinct buckets. The first one is personal safety. That's very much about your concerns about yourself, your own health, your loved ones, your family, your teams. The second one is social safety. So should I be out? Should I be going shopping? Should I be out taking my exercise? It's kind of that social responsibility. And then the third one is economic safety. And that's really the fear that everyone has about the potential financial impact this is going to have. So I think it's really important that we have that in the forefront of our minds when we are having our interactions with our teams. And, science would tell us that human brains don't work well with ambiguity, and they certainly don't work well when that's coupled with your safety being threatened, which, let's be honest, this COVID-19 situation is doing all of that, and maybe if not a little bit more. So we need to dig as leaders really deep to enable our teams to be able to work at home remotely at full capacity. But we need to recognize people's needs for safety is going to be paramount in their minds. So if we can just consider that throughout the workshop, I think that will be a useful foundation for what we're going to talk about today. So the first slide we're going to turn to really talks about leadership posture and safety, mattering, and belonging, which obviously I've just touched upon. But a leadership mindset is very much the tone in how you as individuals and as leaders are going to navigate these situations. And your leadership posture, your ability to find that balance between emotional employee well-being versus driving production of your business is going to be key. And I guess the mindset I would use is we're seeing a lot in the press at the moment of changing the words stuck at home to safe at home. Mindset is a really, really powerful thing, especially when you're working from home. So really thinking about and being aware that your tone is going to set the tone for the people that you touch that day. The reality is, for a lot of us, our personal safety has been put in question, and everyone is going to need to feel that they're safe, as I've touched upon, that they belong, and what they're doing still matters. What they're doing in terms of their job still has a purpose. And by allowing people to work remotely, we're confirming and reaffirming their safety. Belonging and mattering fundamentally is going to come down to the ways in which you regularly and consistently communicate with your teams and still give them clear guidance and focus. As leaders, we need to just do the best that we can to meet these needs. And I think we can do that regardless of location and proximity. And, I guess the fact is your leadership, if it's strong, the location's not going to matter. Where the team is not going to matter. So I think when you think about remote leadership, it's a really useful skill to have in your repertoire. And once mastered, it allows you to lead with much more greater flexibility and dexterity. But the reality is we're asking people to learn this skill incredibly fast and under very unusual circumstances. So if you're on the call and you've had a work from home policy in place for a long time, fantastic. If you're on this call and it's the first time that you've had to work remotely, it's also going to be useful for you. So it's going to help both those scenarios. And I do believe a lot of the tips or insights or recommendations in this workshop will be useful when we're indeed back to the new normal. The next slide really explores what changes the same and what stays the same. And I guess the what you're doing is not changing. the why you're doing it is not changing, it's the how that's changing. So what I mean by that is your leadership doesn't change in this new working from home the situation we've all found ourselves in. In fact, the continuity of your leadership is more important than ever. You need to listen, support, connect, and I guess deliver an even more better customer service experience, create memories with your colleagues, your candidates, and your clients or customers. So I guess, you know, we would recommend you stay calm as best as you can. And what we mean by that is try and respond versus react. And reacting is about acting quickly without thought, and it can often perpetuate a situation and make things worse. It's often when we get caught in the grip of a situation, and responding is about staying calm, taking a step back and really thinking about how you can best support your people. Now, that is a lot easier said than done, especially when we're all in a very stressful situation. In stressful situations, we all tend to go to our stress behaviors. And I think stress and adrenaline serves you really well in the first 2 to 3 weeks. It's like a sprint. It will get you through. My humble opinion is it's not going to serve us as well in a marathon. And I think, you know, the fact that, you know, we're potentially going to be in a lockdown situation for a few more weeks to come, and probably when we go back to work, it will be in a phased capacity. So I think the reality is that responding versus reacting sounds a lot easier than the reality of it. But if you can just consider that and have it in the forefront of your mind, that will really, really help. Trying to find that balance, that leadership posture between driving business and employee well-being, that's going to be key. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a little bit more detail further on in the presentation. But I think whether you're leading remotely, whether you're leading in an office, we can only control what we can control. And that's your attitude and your behaviors. And I think I heard this the other day, a colleague of mine said, it's as exhausting working really hard all day as it is worrying all day. And I think, you know, we would urge you to put your energies where you can get the greatest return. And I know for me, you know, not getting caught up in the media swirl that is out there, actually focusing on my work, you know, homeschooling the children, whatever it might be, that's definitely been a better utilization of my time. So I would definitely share that tip with everyone out there. So if we move on to using technology, I guess when we think about technology, a lot of this is going to sound very familiar because you're probably all doing it already, but I think it's absolutely critical that we take the time to understand all of our IT capabilities that we have at our fingertips, and that everyone on your team does the same. We would urge that if you've got anyone new on your team, that you give them extra support, block time to give them that training. That doesn't have to be you, that could be the IT department, that could be the training department. But I think now is a really good time to see and test all of those IT tools that we've been paying for, where we're going to get the return, if you like. And, you know, our experience would tell us that you need to make sure that all the systems are working smoothly. So whether that's your phone systems, whether that's Skype, Teams, Zoom, you know, CRM systems, fulfillment systems, logistics systems, you know, all of those things are super important that you know that they're working well. And I guess one point I'd make here that we found internally, a silver lining would be the fact the speed and flow of information of leading virtually versus in a face-to-face environment has really been a benefit for us. And I would be surprised if that certainly isn't a benefit for yourselves on the call. When we think about managing technology internally, we think about two keywords: consistency and predictability. What we would recommend is that you all use an instant messenger calendar sort of Outlook system, whereby you can instantly see people's availability. It encourages spontaneous conversation. It's kind of that replacement, if you like, for those conversations in the kitchen whilst you're making a cup of tea or at the water cooler. And the consistency and predictability of your meetings are going to be more critical than ever, because they reinforce what we spoke about earlier in terms of making people feel safe and that they matter. So we would recommend you schedule all your meetings that would normally happen in the office for the next month. Whether those are daily meetings, weekly meetings, one-on-one meetings, this will provide a sense of certainty to your staff, and that check-ins aren't changing. And that could be the one familiar thing that they get to deal with that week or that day. And don't underestimate the power of that, especially if you're leading someone who's working from home on their own. You know, the isolation mindset is a real thing. And again, we'll talk about that in a moment. You know, I would say that we still need to use all of the things that we would use in a meeting, but now we just do it virtually. So we share our screens like we are today. Try and make as many interactions face-to-face. So if you're on a call, switch to FaceTime. You know, seeing someone's face, as corny as it sounds, seeing someone smile can really help from an engagement point of view and a motivation point of view. I would always set an agenda to the call so people know what to expect, which reinforces the consistency and the familiarity. I would encourage everyone to have a voice, you know, maybe rotate the host, because, you know, giving everyone a chance to speak right now is super important. And, you know, basically keep the meetings as consistent as you can to how they were prior to leading your teams remotely. If we look now at managing technology externally, it's pretty similar really. When you and your teams are interacting with your clients, your customers, it's as important as you can to remain positive and compassionate. I think I mentioned it earlier that everyone's having a different emotional reaction, and we need to be sensitive to that and help and support them where we can. Part of that is going to be remaining focused on what we can do for them and talking about situations that we have control over, that we have influence over. So I guess that doesn't mean abandoning your mission, your vision, your purpose, your operating models at all. If anything, it will still remain the touchstone in the cornerstone of what your conversation's about. And that will stop as well, we believe, that kind of commiserating with customers about what we've lost in, you know, and what's happened in the turn of events with everyone's circumstances. That's not to say that we're not empathetic and compassionate, of course, but actually keeping these internal missions, visions, goals in front and center helps reinforce the familiarity and that what we're doing, we're contributing and it matters. So, you know, with our clients, we can still have virtual meetings as we are today. We can still use technology to help us, you know, push along our processes, deliver on our promises and expectations with our clients. And I guess a really good example of that that we can use from our own experiences, for those of you that have recruited with us previously, you will know that we would often host back-to-back hosted interviews. To now we are offering virtual back-to-back interviews. It's still the same process, it still feels the same, and it's still allowing us to still deliver our speed and quality of service to our clients. So as I move on to the next slide, really the next slide talks about virtual leadership, and I've touched upon this, but the importance of being open, transparent, and authentic is really important. And I think something that I've learned is don't hesitate to share with your teams that things are moving at a rate of knots. And what you might agree at 10 o'clock in the morning could well have changed by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So having that transparency that things change, I think is really important. I think we also need to be aware of our tone, our messaging, our language, because we don't have the luxury of looking into someone's eyes or seeing someone's body language if they're struggling or if they're upset. So I think language is really important. The words that we use, words are really powerful. And, you know, I think using positive affirmations of, I'm here for you. What can I do to help you? I believe in you. I know this wasn't the plan, but this can still get done. We're just going to be doing it slightly differently. So I think, you know, I'd like to reiterate the point I made earlier on is, you know, whether leading remotely in an office, we can only control what we can control, and that is our attitudes and our behaviors. So as we move on now to the next slide, which really talks a bit more about balancing people and processes, and that's pretty much as you would imagine. It's really thinking about how do we balance that emotional employee well-being with driving production or driving revenues. And I think, you know, we would always say put people first, especially in this situation. You can't have a process without the people, so always start with the people. And I think if you think of your own office, you think of your own team right now, that isolation mindset is a real thing. And if you're a new employee at home, or if you're someone who's been recently promoted and you're at home, you know, are they comfortable asking for help? How can we be proactive in encouraging that? How are we going to know if someone's having a really difficult call and they need support? So I guess what we would say is look for early warning signs that people might be losing confidence or focus. And, you know, how that could look could be someone becomes particularly sensitive to critique. Someone who was really vocal on calls previously could suddenly go a little bit withdrawn and quiet. So I think just, you know, maybe just use your senses a little bit more when we're working remotely, because as I said, we don't have body language to help us. Our recommendation in terms of keeping your people engaged and motivated is to still have those 2 or 3 touch points a day with that person one-on-one. That is probably the biggest influence you can have on your team's level of engagement and motivation. And, you know, I think when we talk about process, I touched upon it earlier, keep that front and center. It's a key touch point, and it will give familiarity and consistency to your teams. And we would recommend still keep training. You know, your training departments and HR teams will be desperate to help you. That makes people feel invested in. It makes them feel like they matter and that they're important and that there's value. There's one thing we would recommend you do, and it's something called a SWOT analysis, whereby we'd recommend that you think about every one of your direct reports and really evaluate their strengths, their weaknesses, their opportunities, and their threats. And if you looked at someone's strengths, could you delegate something to them? Could they potentially mentor a new person or someone who's been recently promoted? When you think of someone's weaknesses, think about where their knowledge lacks. Think about where their experience might let them down and they might need upskilling. Opportunities would be looking, is there someone who potentially is really good at something? I don't know, like client interfacing or technology support, whatever it might be, and maybe give them more so they can have a greater impact. And then threats is really understanding what each one of your direct reports' Achilles heel is. So what might make them derail, what might take their focus or their confidence away, that ultimately will affect productivity. So, and I appreciate it feels like I'm asking you to do a hell of a lot on this call. And, you know, if you're anything like us, it feels like we're busy, super busy, you know, fighting fires and doing everything in between. But to actually take time to go slower right now so you can go faster, I can honestly say from our experience that will really, really serve you well in the future. So as we move on to pulse checks, pulse checks is really touch points. It's another word for a touch point. And really this is re-emphasizing the importance of keeping the communication consistent and formal, and, you know, really stick with your people and have those 2 or 3 calls a day. You know, I think Steve referred to it earlier about life comes before work. You know, if your parents are at home homeschooling their children, you know, I've had school holidays the last 2 weeks. That has been amazing. I am dreading them going back to school next week, because I have certainly found out in the last 5 weeks that teachers aren't paid enough. What about people that are maybe looking after elderly parents who've already been severely impacted financially from this? So, you know, talk to your teams, work out what balance, what flexibility you can give them. And again, I know that sounds like I'm asking you to have more conversations that are going to encourage you to maybe slow down to go faster, but they will really, really help you in the long run. I guess the most important thing is that we communicate 2 to 3 times a day, as I've said, and make sure you're saying thank you, whether that's thank you for your dedication, for their patience, for their flexibility. They will mean everything right now. And those how are yous, what do you need from me, they are going to go a really long way and really help you from an engagement, as I've said, motivation, but I also think from a loyalty perspective as of when we come out of this. So if we turn to managing productivity remotely, I think we would recommend you look at 3 things: your key contributions, your expected deliverables, and your expected teammanship. Now, when we talk about key contributions, we mean look at each team and function and what do you need from them, whether that be a daily, a weekly, or monthly process, and work out who's accountable for what. Expected deliverables is around activity, results, the impact, your products, whatever it might be that's front and center of your business. And then expected teammanship. I think this has definitely been one of the silver linings in this situation. Collaboration internally for us has never been higher. Everyone's helping each other out, picking up extra work, delegating to someone who might have a slightly better skill set for something. So we would urge you to look at those 3 main areas. And then what we would ask is you ask yourself 2 really key questions. The first one is, do you trust your people to do what they need to do? If the answer is no to that, then we would probably suggest you've got a staff issue. The second question is, do you trust your people that they know how to do what they can? And if your answer is no to that, then you've got a training issue. So hopefully by asking yourself those questions about your teams, that will really help you identify who needs what from you and where to prioritize your time from a people perspective. So moving on to the last slide now, I just want to kind of bring it together and really talk about that behaving with integrity and compassion is central to any corporate culture, and that remains even more truer in today's times. You know, now more than ever, your clients, your candidates, your colleagues, your customers are going to turn to you for empathy, for partnership, and your commitment to what you can do for them now will make a lasting impression. People will remember how you treated them. People will remember the knowledge that you shared with them. So I guess we would like to leave you with one thought. You're still the same great professional that they trust and appreciate. You're still the same great leader that they trust and appreciate. That hasn't changed. The only thing that has changed, like we said earlier, was the fact you're working from home. And I would build on the trust that you have. I would, provide them with as much positive news as you can. I appreciate there's not a lot out there, but there is some. And encourage people, because that is lacking dramatically right now. And your ability to balance your professionalism and compassion right now, that's going to be your legacy. That's going to be your trademark as a leader from this situation. So take something good from it. And everyone's experiencing this differently and experiencing these things differently at different times. As I said, good day, bad day, something in between. Just be aware of that. Listen to people, find out where they are on that journey. Be curious, ask them, and do your best to meet them where they are on that journey. And I can promise you that that will set you apart from any call that they receive that day, whether that be from a client, a customer, a candidate, or a colleague. So thank you very much for listening today. I hope that there are some things in there that you can use, that you can share with your teams. If you've got any questions or you would like further information, then please reach out to your local Robert Half consultant. I know they'd only be more than happy to help you. And with that, thank you for listening, and I'll pass back to Steve, who will close the webinar today.
Katy, thanks ever so much for that today. I thought yet again the content and the delivery was absolutely superb. I've heard that a couple of times now, because I think it's the second time we've done it, with a couple of practice runs for this, and every single time I think as the landscape changes and we kind of take on what's in front of us day to day, there's always something that I'm now taking away from your content that I know even myself can implement the minute we leave this webinar. So thank you ever so much again. So that I don't forget, I'll get this bit done in that we've got some more webinars lined up for next week. So Katy will be repeating this webinar again next Tuesday, same time at 3 o'clock on managing remotely. So if you've got anyone in your teams or in your wider business that you think would benefit from the content, then reach out to your Robert Half contact and get the link to sign up for that particular webinar. If you want to just dial in again and listen to it and just hear, and as I said, and get a few more takeaways to implement, then feel free. On Wednesday, we've got remote onboarding. We sold this one out pretty much within half a day. And we're building upon this one. So not only will our very own director, Krista McNamara, be presenting some content on how you can still run interview processes remotely, but also how you can onboard remotely as well. So she'll be giving you some content there. But exciting times on our side is that Robert Half have just invested in a number of loaner laptops that we can loan out to very new perm hires or interim hires. And on top of that, access to AWS, so Amazon Workspace, the Amazon Workspace solution, so they can actually get access to your own CRM, ERP systems from home on one of our laptops. And get up to speed very, very quickly as well. So myself and Kristen will cover off all of that on Wednesday. And then Thursday, and I believe I've got this right, but Matt Robinson, one of our managers again within our leadership and development team, and this is down to your guys' feedback, will be presenting a webinar, same time, 3 o'clock next Thursday, the 23rd, on leading in uncertain times. So some great content coming up there. As I said, reach out to your contact at Robert Half and they'll get you signed up. The webinar's being recorded today, so everyone that's logged on will get a copy of it to double back and again, sort of double back on your takeaways. And lastly, you're going to be, and I think more importantly, you're going to be prompted for your feedback on today's content, but also be asked to give us the heads up on any more content or help or advice that you need. I'm sure Katy will agree with me. Never would she have thought this time 4 or 5 weeks ago that she'd be hosting a webinar. Looks like she's done it for years, an absolute pro there, taking to it like a duck to water. But we're really keen to hear your feedback, and whatever you want as a business, we'll get out there. And lastly, I suppose big thank you again to Katy Tanner, but I was having a one-to-one with Katy myself earlier today because I think even some of us that have got sort of quite big roles that are looked up to can find it quite lonely and quite tough at the minute. So I had one-to-one with Katy, and then she forwarded over a poem. So I hope she doesn't get too embarrassed if I end on this, but it's a poem by James Coos and Barry Posner from the book Credibility. And I'll leave you with this. So, and I'm going to read, but be careful of your thoughts, for your thoughts become your words. Be careful of your words, for your words become your deeds. Be careful of your deeds, for your deeds become your habits. Be careful of your habits, for your habits become your character. Be careful of your character, for your character becomes your destiny. Be careful of your leadership, for your leadership becomes your legacy. So I think that's a very, very poignant and powerful poem to end today's webinar on. Look out for it. James Coos and Barry Posner from the book Credibility. And just leaves me to say, stay safe, stay in and wash your hands. And we'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.